and welcome. We'll start off with a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And we are discussing, thank you, we are discussing laws of forbidden and permitted animals. And in case you weren't here yesterday and you didn't look at the recording, I actually believe this has to do with this whole issue of purification. It's another kind of purification, has to do with immortality. That in truth, what we are doing is preparing ourselves by living lives that are in sync with the universe and that are in sync with the creator of that universe, preparing ourselves for a life that goes beyond this one. That is the thought behind it, because in truth, this life is so brief, so short, no matter how long we live, it's so short. So with that, I am going to go to the text. And we'll continue. Actually, I believe we're in a Rashi, but perhaps not. That's, my short-term memory is so. Okay, here we go. Sorry, just looking and seeing. Here we are. Oh, next verse. There we go. For some strange reason, this came out to be so large, at any rate. So we're talking about cattle animals, as opposed to birds and fish and insects. So, kol mafreset parsa, everything that splits its hoof. V'shosad shesa prasot, and I believe that means completely split. That its hooves is parsa, right? Shesa, again, has to do with, I believe, let me look at, yes, that this all has to do with making sure that the hooves are completely split. Ma'alat geira, and chewing the cud, right? This, and well, Rashi is going to take a look at these words and help us understand the actual Hebrew better. Bab Hema, in domesticated animals, right? Ota tochelu, that you may eat, that you may eat. So, interestingly enough, we also, because deer, species of deer, also have completely split hoofs and also chew the cud. They're also permissible. However, their method of shchita, because they did not go up on the altar, I believe, their method of slaughtering is slightly different. At least it's not necessarily that they aren't slaughtered to remove all the blood, but there are some different, at least as best as I could tell from my studies, there are some distinctions between deer and cows, sheep, and goats. Anyway, let's take a look. So, mafreset. This Rashi knows this is not a common Hebrew word, but it targumor. So he says, just as Onkelos translates it, stika. Stika means, and there's the sika called the stika, the stikan. Stika would mean stikan. They split parsata, hoofs, right? So he says mafreset means to split. And parsa, and he gives you the French word, plante, foot, right? And here's the Yiddish, fuz ala, your feet, balaz in a foreign language. So, v'shosad shesa, so here we go. Muvdelet, it is split, it is separated, milamala umilamata, above and below. Ishte tzipornin, it looks like, So two we're talking about like a tziporin is your nail. It's two nails. So Targum, and again, just as it's the Targum translates it, umitalfa talfin. In other words, and that's in other words that its toes are separated. Sheyesh peparsota stukot milamala. And the Torah, Rashi answers the implied question of why does the Torah need to go into such detail? Excuse me, one second. And that is because there are certain animals, right? Sure, got it. Whose hooves are split above the Einan Shasuot Umuvdalot Agamre, but they aren't completely split and separated. Shemilmata Mechubarot, because on the lower side they are in fact connected. He doesn't tell us what animals those are, but and I personally don't know. I don't know if any of you know what animals those might be, but apparently there are species that have that, and that's why the Torah has to tell us that the hooves are completely split. And you understand that this sounds completely arbitrary, and I would say again, this comes out as a chok, right? As an arbitrary law, but I believe again that the nature of this arbitrary law is to put us in a position of gaining immortality. Ma'alat gera. Ma'ale, so we said this means chewing the cud. Ma'ale, it brings up, umakia, literally it means to vomit, right? Ha'ochel, the food, mime'eha, from its innards, umachazeret oto latoch piha, and it returns it to this food. In other words, it gorges up or disgorges up the food and returns it to its mouth, lechatshor, to chew it up, right? Or the tachano, and to grind it hadek into very thin pieces, which is, of course, exactly what happens. That is the process of chewing the cud, that the animal basically, when it grazes, takes large amounts of grass. It goes into one of its stomachs, into this first stomach, and from that first stomach, it gets returned. Later, it sits down. That stomach regorges the food into its mouth. It chews the food up even better, and at that point, it is able to digest it. My understanding is that because grass in general is very difficult to digest, in the right sense that in digestion, the body takes the nutrients from the food we eat and then passes it into sustains the body in that way. Geira. It's cud, I think, is the way we would translate it. Although it doesn't, there's no dot in this hay, so it just means cud, not its cud. Kach shmo, that's what it's called. Vayitachen, and it appears, Rashi's going to suggest, migzeirat, it is the same sense of mayim hanigarim, the waters that flow to the earth. So it raises a flow of food, I imagine. This is from the second book of Samuel, chapter 14. Shehu nigrar achar hapeh. That is to say, it flows back into the mouth. V'targumo, and the translation, pishra, here it is, pishra, right? And the pishra has to do with something that is melting, right? So, she'al yedei hagera, and why is it referred to as something that's melted? Because by means of this cud, okay, ha'ochel nifshar v'namuach, the food itself, in a sense, gets fined or melts, you could say, right? V'namuach, I think namuach means very soft. I'm guessing, but I think that's what it means. Lauren, of course, if you have something that would differ from that, please let me know.
It just says dissolved and melted.
Okay, there we go. All right, that's nice. I'm going to type that in for my own.
It says originally it says dissolved where it says pishrat. And then
Yeah,
it says since through its being regurgitated the food is dissolved and melted.
okay. So let's say
So
that.
I guess the soft part is the melt part.
Right. Okay, let's go with that. Oh, did I spell that correctly? Or is there just
It
one?
did.
Okay.
It looks funny, doesn't it?
It does
With the
look
two
funny.
S's there, the dissol. But
Does it?
it is, no, two S's is correct.
Well, it's not doing anything right now. So
But you had put two
yeah,
S's and there you go.
it is funny.
It's correct though.
Okay, thank you. It just looked strange.
It does. Especially if you take off the VED and just look at dissol.
Yeah,
But like dissolute would.
there we go. All right, good. Thank you. Bebhema, right? Amongst or in the cattle, in cattle. Tevazo, he says amongst cattle. He says this word, yeterahi, it's unnecessary. Okay. It's redundant. The darsha. So how does the fact that it repeats this, okay, because it also already talked Mikol Behema up here, so why does it have to say it here? And Rashi says the reason is classic way of looking at it, the drasha, in other words, the to add a level of interpretation to it, to give us an opportunity to interpret it further. Lahatir, to permit et hashalil, this I believe b'ma'e imor. So shalil, I'm not sure if that's the embryo or the afterbirth, or I
It
think,
says fetus here.
okay, so fetus, embryo, okay. I don't know if a fetus is a more developed embryo.
I would think so.
Yeah, thank you.
Ha, the British spelling.
Uh, yes. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think I'm putting it back in. I like it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in South Africa, so I learned British. I learned English as opposed to American. Okay. I'm named Sabima Aimor, which is found in the um, in the innards of its mother. So it is. I mean, that would definitely be a question, right? It would be a question. So let's go on. See what Rashi has to tell us here. Yeah. Ota tochelu, that you should eat. Okay. As velo behema tamea, as opposed to, and it's interesting, it uses the word tame, impure, right? That's the word we use, and not impure cattle. Vahalo, and Rashi goes on to say Vahalo Bahazarahi. He says already we are told that impure cattle are forbidden. So why does it then positively say that you shall consume? Notice that's not a negative commandment, that's a positive. One might say it's a positive commandment. Okay. Ella. So what's the point of that? La'avor aleha. To understand, to sort of double the transgression, ba'aseh v'lo ta'aseh, that when it comes to this commandment, it includes both a positive commandment and a negative commandment. The Torah states explicitly that you shouldn't eat impure animals, and you should only consume pure animals. And of
So
course,
is that saying that like because people like to say that if you could it's easy to be kosher if you're vegetarian, but it sounds like it's not just saying that eating meat is an option. It sounds like it's saying it's a mitzvah.
yes, it does. It does. I mean, interestingly enough, the technical definition of a mitzvah means it's an optional or a suggested good deed. Interestingly enough, whereas chiyuv means an obligation. So the question is, whether or not eating it, saying that you shall eat, given the context of it, means it as a chiyuv, that's an obligation, or is it a mitzvah, meaning it's something that we suggest that you do, that it's something that l'chadchila, ab initio, this is what we would like you to do, but if you don't do it, there's no penalty. And we definitely have that category. I will go for it. Thank you, by the way, for opening up that particular discussion. All right. So I heard once a very interesting interpretation, and that is that since everything, it's a way of looking at life and death, all right, which is that in the process of, in fact, shchita, of going to those pains to slaughter the animal in the way one ritually slaughters the animal, is that it also elevates the soul of that animal. That trying to see it perhaps from a universalistic, divine, creator point of view, and because God is the author of life, to hold fast to that concept, that God is able to, I want to say justify, but I also think it goes beyond simply justification. But to understand that mortality is an essential part of existence. And it is the very nature of this world that change, and of course, mortality is a huge change, is built into the nature of this world, because the ability to change means one can also change for the better. And if it were not the fact that this world allows us to change, tshuva, think about it, tshuva, repentance, would be impossible. And it is and we know how difficult it is to change, but it's not impossible. And so there's all kinds of wonderful values that go along with that possibility. But the fact is that and of course you can always say, oh, what a rationalization. But the truth is we are apparently the structure of our teeth is such that we are carnivores. We are carnivores. And as long as, and even though, yes, we were originally created as vegetarians, and it was only after Noah that we were given permission to consume meat, but nevertheless, the very nature of life is that we are not immortal. We are not immortal. And as long as we're talking about this, there are situations where eating meat would be, in fact, a chiyuv, where I believe that in the context of offering up shlamim, right, peace offerings, the family consuming that is a mitzvah, and not, well, I'm saying mitzvah, but I think it's more than a mitzvah, chiyuv. And also, when it came to sin offerings, the priests were obligated to eat certain parts of that sin offering. That consuming the meat, in fact, was a very positive act. I will go further. One could actually sort of do a whole article about this, and that is, there's a statement in the tradition that says, Ein simcha ela al habasar, which I'm glad to say that the American meat industry has not decided to use as a catchphrase, but essentially it means there is no joy except when you're having meat at your meal. Now, this isn't to, yeah, go ahead. I just going to say it wasn't to prohibit vegetarianism, okay? But go ahead, David.
So, okay, so is eating the sin offering by the priest considered is it an obligation or a mitzvah?
Okay, again, given my level of knowledge, right, which admittedly is not encyclopedic, it said, we had actually read in one of our lessons that the priests eat from the sin offering, and the individual who brought the sin offering gains kapara. Right?
I guess why I'm asking that is because that basically forces priests not to be vegetarians, right?
Correct. That is
and that doesn't seem that doesn't, well, anyway, that doesn't quite I don't know. I'm not sure that sits so well, but that I just can't believe that God would force. You know what I mean? Well, anyway, yeah. That's my point.
Well,
No,
I think the
I agree.
vegetarian lifestyle and attitude is a sort of a modern construct. I mean, it's not that there may have been people who abstain from meat for certain reasons, but vegetarianism
Right.
is kind of a modern
Right,
ethical.
but we
Which
were
goes,
vegetarians though, but we were vegetarians to begin with, so I can't
okay.
see why
Oh,
vegetarians. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, until we learned how
let,
to cook.
right,
well,
but still, yeah. But okay,
let me back up and say, yes, true. But that was until we sinned and ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And at which point we were no longer immortal. But the truth is, of course, we still continue to be vegetarians, but we read how Abel brought the firstlings of his flock as an offering. So it wasn't that we were forbidden to kill animals after the Garden of Eden. Possibly before, when our diet was strictly the fruit of trees, yes, but after leaving the Garden of Eden, it was no longer the case. Again, even though there is room for debate over this issue, the killing of an animal for human consumption, if not for offering on the altar, had to be painless and instantaneous.
And it must have been hard for early people who didn't eat meat to get protein because they didn't understand the science of how to put together various simpler proteins to get the complex proteins that you can get by eating, animal products.
Incidentally, you may want to talk to Native Americans, because my understanding is that Native Americans have a very high diet of meat. I actually learned this when I was up in Minnesota and had met with a group of Native Americans, had a very, or should I say, indigenous people, whatever the correct terminology is these days. I think that's supporting your point, Lauren, that it has to do with some modern sensibilities. I mean, you look at veganism, for example, which goes beyond vegetarianism, and trying to understand the psychology, should we say, behind these sorts of things might be interesting. But again, I also wanted to say, before we got into the whole discussion, that I'm not here to criticize vegetarianism. I just think it's okay to allow for room for discussion.
oh
And
yeah, no, and I'm personally not a vegetarian. I guess my point though was I find it interesting that there would actually be a commandment that
yeah,
would force someone not to be a vegetarian, right?
right,
Basically, priests
right.
would be, if they were obligated to eat the sin offering, by
Yeah,
definition means they cannot be vegetarians.
that is
So,
that is correct. But it was a
and
class, remember, it was a class of people who.
yeah, no, I get it. I just find that very interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for the discussion.
No,
Okay.
I'm glad. I think it's great that we were able to do that.
And
Okay.
the Bible does not always A, reflect modern life, or B, deal with, history in the same way we view it now, as like the history of food and eating. It's, we know more, but the Bible tells us one thing, but they tell us that what they tell us, they have reasons for telling it.
Right.
There's something we can learn from the way they looked at it, even if we have information that tells us that this, has some inaccuracies. It doesn't mean it's not also teaching us something.
Agreed.
Yeah, agree.
Right. I think that's sort of the beauty of the rabbinic tradition, is that it allows for a certain level of dynamism and adaptability to what's written in the Torah, but it all at least stems from a deep, deep, deep appreciation of what the Torah has to tell us, and without a rejection of the Torah and its concepts, or putting them down, or that kind of thing. But it still allows for an ability to adapt to particular time and space. that's got to do with application, right? That's the process of. I like to give the example of mathematics and applied mathematics. There's a difference, quite a difference between the two. But applied mathematics depends heavily on mathematical theory. So, likewise, how do we live our lives? And again, keeping in mind the broad issues involved, which is trying to get in sync with the universe and the creator of the universe. So we'll stop the recording with this, and